In 1758, Halifax was established on a bluff of the Roanoke River. Because it was navigable by ocean-going vessel, the town became a center for commerce and political power during the colonial period. Agriculture was the foundation of the economy, and enslaved labor was its backbone. The town of Halifax is best known as the place where North Carolina first declared independence from Great Britain. Although the Halifax Resolves may have made North Carolina first in freedom, this early call for independence did not include freedom for Halifax's enslaved residents. No matter their legal status, African Americans would be inspired by the ideals and spirit of the American Revolution to pursue their own independence and liberation. The 18th century economy of Halifax County, North Carolina, was based on plantation agriculture. Cash crops included tobacco, hemp, and grain. Much of the labor was provided by enslaved African Americans. Colonial population records are spotty, but it has been estimated that 41,000 enslaved African Americans lived in North Carolina in 1767. Tobacco production areas like Halifax tended to have high enslaved populations. Royal Governor William Tryon estimated the African American population of eastern North Carolina to be 5 to 1 white person. In 1739, up to 100 enslaved individuals from plantations along the Stono River in South Carolina would attempt to seek freedom in Spanish-controlled Florida. Although the Stono Rebellion would be put down by local militia, its memory would still linger in the minds of plantation owners and royal governors on the eve of the American Revolution. Despite enslaved African Americans enduring physical bondage, their minds and spirit remained free. The terminology used in this talk reflects this freedom of spirit and will refer to escaping African Americans as freedom seekers, rather than escapees, fugitives, or runaways. Historic Halifax State Historic Site, as a partner in the National Park Service Network to Freedom, uses the term freedom seekers to demonstrate what was in the heart of African Americans who acted to make liberty a reality. Shortly after the first shots of the American Revolution took place on April 19, 1775, in Lexington, Massachusetts, North Carolina Royal Governor Josiah Martin would abandon the Governor's Palace, often called Tryon's Palace, in New Bern, and relocate his headquarters to Fort Johnson in modern Southport. Rumors and an intercepted letter suggested that Martin was contemplating supporting revolt amongst enslaved African Americans. In late July of 1775, Fort Johnson would be attacked by colonist militia, forcing Martin to flee the colony on a British warship. Also in the summer of 1775, "Liberty or death" chanting mobs in Virginia would drive their royal governor, John Murray, 4th Earl of Dunmore, to also flee his colony in a British ship. In November of 1775, Dunmore promised freedom to any enslaved or indentured servant that were willing to bear arms and join His Majesty's troops. On November 17, 1775, the Virginia Gazette reported one freedom seeker's disappearance as part of a determined resolution to get liberty, as he conceived by flying to Lord Dunmore. Within months, Dunmore raised an army of about 300 enslaved and indentured laborers. This unit of African American soldiers became known as the Ethiopian Regiment and would clash with Patriot militia at the Battle of Great Bridge. Period accounts suggest that they were uniformed in an overshirt emblazoned with the motto, "Liberty to Slaves." After the Battle of Great Bridge, the British would continue to offer hope for freedom seekers that served the Crown, although most would serve in non-combat roles. Service to the Crown did not necessarily guarantee liberty for all, but at least 3,000 newly freed African Americans were transported to Nova Scotia by the British at the end of the American Revolution. Pro-independence colonists were quick to suggest the royal governors were part of a conspiracy to undermine the plantation economy and encouraged many undecided North Carolinians to break ties with Great Britain. On April 12, 1776, 83 delegates to the North Carolina 4th Provincial Congress met in Halifax and issued a set of resolutions that became known as the Halifax Resolves. The document listed several grievances against the British government and accused royal governors of protecting enslaved men who stained their hands in the blood of their masters. The Halifax Resolves also gave North Carolina's delegates to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia permission to vote for independence. The Halifax Resolves is regarded as the first official action towards independence by any of the colonies. The first public reading of the Declaration of Independence in North Carolina would take place in Halifax on August 1, 1776. While the British offered liberty for enslaved African Americans willing to serve the king, many free African Americans in North Carolina supported the cause for American independence. By the time of the first U.S. Census in 1790, free blacks would make up 3.2% of the population of Halifax County. Free blacks had the right to vote and were required to serve in the state militia, both during the colonial period and under the first North Carolina state constitution that was ratified in Halifax in the fall of 1776. Many free blacks would support the cause for American independence, and it has been estimated that at least 5,000 free African Americans served in the Continental Army, Navy, and state militias throughout the American Revolution. Both the North Carolina Militia and Continental Army were integrated during the American Revolution. According to an August 1778 report on Continental Army troop strength at White Plains, New York, African American soldiers made up 4.8% of the North Carolina Brigade. North Carolina's African American Patriots would have known Halifax as a militia district muster ground, Continental Army supply depot, recruiting discharge station, and a stop on the road to join General George Washington's army in the North. American independence did not deliver life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for North Carolina's enslaved men, women, and children. The growth of America's tobacco, cotton, and rice industries led to stricter laws and harsher work conditions. During the post-war period, Halifax County's enslaved community grew considerably. According to the first United States Census in 1790, Halifax County recorded 6,506 enslaved men and women. By 1860, the number had risen to 10,349. Meanwhile, the population of free whites remained relatively static, around 6,000 to 7,000 individuals throughout this time. Many enslaved African Americans would seek their own independence on what would become known as the Underground Railroad. Halifax's location on a major south to north road system and the Roanoke River's access to ocean-going seaports made Halifax an important stop on this network to freedom. Free people of color often aided freedom seekers by concealing them, forging passes, and securing their passage on vessels bound for a larger port or free state. Escape on the Underground Railroad was illegal and fraught with danger. Many freedom seekers would only taste freedom for a short time before being apprehended and returned to enslavement. The following account comes to us from James Williams on his journey through Halifax in 1838. The thought of being again made a slave and of suffering the horrible punishment of a runaway restrained me. I lay in the woods all day without food. The next evening, I soon found a large pile of excellent apples. from which I supplied myself. The next evening, I reached Halifax Courthouse, and I then knew that I was near Virginia. On the 7th of October, I came to the Roanoke and crossed it in the midst of a violent storm of rain and thunder. The current ran so furiously that I was carried down with it, and with great difficulty and in a state of complete exhaustion, reached the opposite shore. James Williams' quest for liberty would eventually carry him as far as Liverpool, England. Along the way, he would be aided by sympathetic American Indians, African Americans, and Caucasian abolitionists. For the freedom seeker, simply crossing the Mason-Dixon line into the free states of the North did not guarantee freedom from slavery. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 and 1850 made it a federal crime to aid and harbor freedom seekers throughout the United States. Many freedom seekers would have to travel as far as Canada or further to maintain their liberty. The American Revolution's emphasis on resistance, equality, and unity shaped African Americans' ongoing fight for liberty and citizenship. Black North Carolinians used various methods in their struggle for independence. While some enslaved people chose to liberate themselves, others fought for their freedom through armed rebellion or military service. Enslaved and free African Americans risked their lives to obtain freedom for themselves and their kin. Historic Halifax State Historic Site is committed to honoring the diverse struggles and experiences of North Carolinians. Historic Halifax is funded by the state of North Carolina and preserves 8 historic buildings ranging from 1758 to 1840. Both the town of Halifax and the historic Halifax Underground Railroad Trail are recognized by the National Park Service as part of the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom.